This is the podcast overview for week 9, where we will be covering chapter 8, interpersonal stress. So here is your to-do list for this week. I have your objectives for chapter 8, and of course you can listen to the podcast overview where I outline each of these objectives and talk a little bit more about them. If you haven't been in the habit of listening to these podcasts, you might want to do that. Oftentimes I give direction and kind of keys to how to take the information and best ways to study and use it for exams. So please take a listen to that podcast. Your lecture slides are here, which will help you follow along with the reading. And the lecture slides really fall in line with the reading in the Harrington text. So they're meant to complement your reading there, not supplement your reading. So if you've been in the habit of kind of skimping on the reading and just using the lecture slides, you're going to miss a lot of details. I had a couple students that I did Zoom meetings with in the last week, and this was the case where, admittedly they weren't really doing the reading or weren't focusing much on the reading and relying pretty heavily on the lecture slides and then not doing well on the exams. So if that is the case for you, please use the lecture slides as a guide, right? Maybe print them out. Like I've said in the past, print them out, have them next to you while you're reading. That might be helpful. There's spots to take notes on the side of each slide. There's lines to take notes. And this can help bridge any gaps between what's on the slides and then what's covered in the text. Places where you can write down examples, definitions, further clarification, anything like that. All right, your discussion this week is going to focus solely on chapter 3 of The Upside of Stress. That's the McGonigal text. We're going to be looking at a couple different rethink stress exercises. So as you've been reading through this book, you're noticing that Dr. McGonigal gives little exercises as you go as a way to kind of check in with you, kind of see how the reading is striking you, and gives you more in-depth ways to be thinking about how you're taking in the material, as well as how you're thinking about your stress, which is why she calls it rethink stress. So these are exercises geared to challenge you in rethinking the way that you handle stress. The topic of the week's chapter in the Harrington text is interpersonal stress, and it does play along nicely with this chapter specifically of the McGonigal book. They don't always do that. Sometimes they map on to one another well, and sometimes not as well. But so I think reading the chapter in the Harrington text would be great to do before you read this one. It will help provide a little bit more context, I think, for understanding some of the concepts. So in the first question, you're using the stress exercise on page 67, and you're going to be looking at what brings meaning to your life. So life meaning is a big concept in positive psychology, and when we talk about rethinking stress, because it helps put things in perspective. So here you're going to be writing about what are your most meaningful roles, relationships, activities, or goals. You might have one in each of those categories. You might not. But what are they in your life right now? What parts of your life are you most likely to experience joy, love, laughter, learning, or a sense of purpose? So these are some reflective questions. Don't jump right into this. Take a little bit to think this over, ponder it for a little bit, because I really want you to kind of dig down into the reservoir of what brings meaning into your life. And sometimes we have to take a step back and really think about that. I think on the surface we think we know what brings meaning, but where do we truly derive a good deal of our just inner joy from? Would you also describe any of these as sometimes or frequently stressful? So here again, I think the key is to understanding that even good things in our lives are stressful. And especially this week, we're talking about interpersonal stress. Sometimes relationships bring the most joy and also the most stress. And sometimes we think, well, how can that be? Because anything that brings joy can bring stress. To take a relationship and make it purposeful and meaningful and manage it sometimes takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. We deal constantly with different people who have different personalities and outlooks and perspectives than we do. And navigating that can sometimes be difficult, but can also be really rewarding, right? So take a moment and think about that, talk about some of that and describe it, and then take another moment to write about why these are important to you. Why do these things bring so much joy to your life? And how would you feel if you suddenly lost one of those sources of meaning? And that's not to be a downer, but again, it's to put perspective on what would happen if one of those things was absent or gone? How might it change your life or change you? All right, and then in the second one, we're looking at the exercise on page 72 and 73, where Dr. McGonigal has listed a bunch of different values, all different kinds. You're going to pick through those, your top three. And this can be challenging because it can be hard to narrow it down to just three. But try to pick your top three that are most important and personally meaningful to you. Describe why each value is important to you and how you express this value in your everyday life, including maybe what you even did today. And I want you to keep in mind, and Dr. McGonigal says this in the exercise, that these values are what you care about. You're expressing what feels important and meaningful to you right now. It doesn't matter if you're quote unquote good at a particular value. It can be something that comes naturally to you, or it can be something that you would like to develop in yourself, that you hold dear, that really matters to you, but you realize it's also maybe a struggle for you. So I want you to talk about those. And then lastly, I put this quote in here by Dr. McGonigal. Sometimes we are all guilty of trying to avoid stress in our lives. It seems like a rational strategy, but almost always backfires. One of the benefits of embracing stress is that you find the strength to pursue goals and endure experiences that are difficult but meaningful. So thinking about that, I want you to do the Rethink Stress exercise on page 85 and write about any costs that you may have experienced trying to avoid stress in your life. So think back on times when you really tried hard to avoid a situation or conversation or an event or something in your life that you knew was stressful, that you knew was going to be hard, and you avoided it or you tried to avoid it. What did that cost you? Or flip that, what might you have gained had you not avoided it, right? So sometimes the hard things in life are what define us, what build us up, which make us stronger and more confident, more sure of ourselves. And so you can always think of the flip side to not doing something stressful is really not challenging yourself and just staying status quo. And there's where we don't see a lot of growth. We've been talking about growth throughout the chapters and how, you can have a growth mindset that really propels you forward in times of stress. If you know that on the other side of the stress is going to be a great experience, or you're going to come away with having learned something through your trials. So this is really, these are reflective exercises. I'm hoping that it's a nice divergence from the more content-related questions you've been getting on the discussion board. So this is a chance for you to be you, share as much as you'd like, and give it thought and be thoughtful in these responses. And I'm so curious to see how you respond to others and other people's viewpoints as well. So that wraps up the week. Please let me know if you have any questions going forward, and I'd be happy to help you. You can email me anytime or Zoom with me anytime.